Hello and welcome to Autism in Conversation with Auticon, a podcast from Auticon, a global IT consultancy whose consultants are all autistic. This series is designed to help raise greater understanding and appreciation of autism through fascinating conversations with inspirational guests. Hosted by me, Carrie Grant MBE. Each episode will feature brilliant guests from all walks of life who each share a passion for making the world more inclusive. We'll be talking about the many benefits of hiring neurodivergent talent through to some of the more common challenges faced by autistic adults navigating the workplace, plus much, much more. All of my 4 children are neurodivergent, so this is a subject that's very close to my heart, and I'm really looking forward to facilitating some great conversations about autism and hopefully learning some new things along the way. I hope you enjoy. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. This episode, I'll be having a chat with the celebrated best-selling author and outspoken comic writer, Kathy Lette. Kathy has an inimitable take on serious current issues, and she'll be joining me in a special one-to-one episode where we share our experiences of parenting autistic children. Now, we're doing this particular podcast remotely because Kathy's in Australia. Welcome to the show, Kathy. It's wonderful to have you on. Kathy, what was happening in your life when you came to the point of having children? Were you were busy working, or what was your situation?
Oh, I'd fallen in love with a new man, and I was just, the snooze alarm had gone off on my biological clock, and it was tick tock, tick tock. I was 30, and my partner, Jeff, had really wanted children, so it was just a natural thing to do. You know, I think I was pregnant when I got married, 3 months pregnant. I was wearing control top pantyhose at the wedding, and I thought, I hope he doesn't come out with a squashed head, you know.
So this was your first child, Jules, right? And at what point did you start to think there's something different about this child?
Well, it's hard when it's your first child because you've got no benchmark. And so he never slept, and he was really anxious as a baby. And if I left the room, he would be hysterical with anxiety. And I just thought maybe that was normal. But my mother's a teacher, and of course she's had 4 children. And so she was the first one who said to me, I think there might be a couple of issues, you know, we should see a psychologist and see what was going on. But in those days, Jules is 31 now. So back then, how old are your kids?
So I've got 4 children. The autistic children are 20 and 16.
Right. Well, back when Jules was diagnosed, he was diagnosed at age 3. The A word was almost like a death sentence. The A word was suddenly my son had become a plant in a gloomy room, you know, and it was my job to kind of drag him into the light. It really branded you. It was almost like saying you had cancer. Like, it was really damning. So it's so wonderful that we've moved on from those dark days. And then it was really hard to get help too. There was hardly any help. And, of course, the government set up bureaucratic speed bumps to slow down a parent's progress. And they encouraged you then to put them in a mainstream school. And to me, putting a kid with autism in a mainstream school is as pointless as giving a fish a bath. You know, they really need specialist help and focus and attention. And the classroom was too loud. And, you know, most kids were striving at school to learn, you know, math and grammar. And Jules was just striving to make himself invisible. And he screamed every day I took him. He screamed and kicked and had a meltdown every day for, 10 years. And I used to take him to school, and then I'd come back and just curl up in a fetal position on the ground and just go hyperventilating because he hated it. It was just so, it was, you know, I always think of how autism must feel some of the time. You know, the Edward Munch, The Scream, where everything's too loud, too bright, too vivid, and so confusing. So as a classroom, well, it must just be torture, I think. So, yeah, it was really, really hard.
I think about sometimes how if we have, you know, like when I was diagnosed with Crohn's disease, you're then given a pathway. You're then given all the information that you need to know about what it is, this condition that you have. And you're sent on your merry way, but you kind of have a sense of what you're doing and where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
Was there access to any information at that point for you as the parent of an autistic child?
Not really. I mean, I think you go through various stages. I went through various stages. The first stage I went through was denial, where I bankrupted myself seeing every medical expert on the planet. I hate to think how many doctors' children I've now put through university. and then the next stage you go through is probably a grief, a bit of the, I think the next stage you go through is guilt, where your guilt gland throbs the whole time, because I kept thinking, was it something I ate? Was it something I drank? Was it that one glass of wine in the final trimester? And if only I'd feng shuied my aura like Gwyneth Paltrow, I wouldn't have an autistic child. And then after that, you go through grief stage, where you grieve for the child you don't have. And that you feel a bit sorry for yourself around that time. I did anyway, and I probably drank too much Chardonnay. And then eventually you just start to think, well, this is the unique little person I've been given, and I've just got to do my best by him. And, and what Jules has taught me, he's taught me to be more compassionate, I think, but he's also taught me that there's no such thing as normal and abnormal. There's ordinary and extraordinary. And people on the spectrum have a sort of literal, lateral, tangential logic, which is truly unique and interesting. And I remember when experts were saying to me that I'd have to put Jules long-term in a home because he wouldn't function in society, I kept thinking, yeah, but I find him so fascinating because he lost, I don't know if this is typical, but he was very bright as a little baby. He talked early and walked early, and he had all these, I kept thinking, oh, I've got a little genius on my hand. He kept hitting these developmental milestones early. But then at about 13 months or so, it was like his computer crashed, and suddenly he lost his language, he retreated into himself. And it took me another 3 years to get him to talk again. He had to have speech therapy and all that sort of stuff. But when he did start talking, he started asking me the most interesting questions. He was like, I was chopping onions one day in the kitchen, and Jules came up and tugged on my skirt, and I looked down, and he said, Mum, if onions make you cry, are they vegetables that make you happy? I thought, what a great question. Oh. And then he's like, well, what's the speed of dark? And I mean, on and on and on, these questions I couldn't answer. But I kept thinking, this kid's really bright and interesting. And, yeah, of course, what I've learned now is that a label is nothing more than something on the side of a jam jar, and that a normal is a setting on a washing machine. But it took me a long time to get there because there just wasn't any sort of encouragement or support about just accepting him for who he was and letting him be his best autistic self. It was always about trying to either cure or contain him. And I think that has changed now for sure. But, it was pretty demoralizing.
Yeah, I think it has changed. But let's just drop that for a minute, because actually, even in the last week, I run a support group for families of autistic girls. And even in the last week, I had a message from someone saying, oh, there's a really good piece of work they're doing in America, and it can really change the autism and kind of take it away. And I thought, wow, we're still in that place. And for me, my children are fabulously autistic. They're wonderfully autistic, and our family is far from being neurotypical, all of us. And so therefore our kids kind of fit right in. But I do think for parents, especially at the beginning of their journey, like you said, I just took him to loads of doctors. It's just that sense of, I need to make this easier for my child, and this is going to be so difficult for him or her or them. And I think that's where it becomes problematic when those groups do approach you, because I get those approaches every now and again. Could we do some work with your child? And I'm like, no, hell no. I want them to be even more autistic, please. Thank you.
Well, I think, it helps to think it with diagnostic hindsight. We know that Mozart and Einstein and Orwell and Van Gogh, and these are brilliant people. So if they cure autism, that means we'll also lose our our obsessive scientists and our incredible composers and all of that. Having said that, if I could take the anxiety away, I would, because it's really, really crippling. And I hate to see Jules when he's in a state of anxiety, because I can't soothe him. And that's the one area of autism that I think is deeply, deeply distressing for autistic people, but also for their carers, because it's like an existential angst that you can subdue with chemically, but they'll have it for life, this anxiety. So
I sometimes think if we could lower the anxiety, a lot of that anxiety is coming from having to live in a neurotypical world.
Sure. If we could if we could think outside the neurotypical box, exactly, that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, society doesn't think that way.
Yeah, yet. We're working on it, Kathy. We're working on it. Yeah. So talk to me about parenting. Because you also have another child, don't you, who's not autistic?
Yeah.
Georgie. So how did you work your parenting?
Well, I used to worry about my daughter. She's 2 years younger, that she would be missing out because, Julius sucked up so much of the oxygen in the family because he needed so much care. He was going to the Tavistock Centre 3 days a week. We were having speech therapy, we were having occupational therapy. There was a lot going on all the time. But all the research shows that the siblings of autistic kids grow up to be incredibly well-rounded, incredibly self-contained. They're not selfish. They make fantastic friends because they've always valued the friendships outside the family. And because they've grown up in a family where there has been sometimes trauma and difficulty, makes them very compassionate. So they grow up to be incredibly well-rounded, well-balanced adults, generally speaking. So you don't need to feel guilty about the siblings of your autistic kids, because all the research shows that they actually become very grounded and warm and empathetic adults. So that's good to know.
As long as we teach them that it's okay to take up the space.
Yeah, and as long as you teach them it's okay to take up the space. Absolutely, that's right. Yeah. So, what else can I say about? I think the other really, really hard thing in the early days with the diagnosis is because, as you say, it's a maze and you're trying to find out as much information as you can. Maybe you find out from other parents, but you've got to be so many things. You've got so many hats.
Yes,
You're the medical expert. You have to be the psychologist. You have to be the bouncer because they get bullied and beaten up at school. You've got to be the educational expert. You've got to be, so many different people, and it's absolutely exhausting, as well as fighting the government to try and get some funding to help them get into the school you want. So, it is a bureaucratic nightmare. And the bullying is something that upsets me the most, because I remember when Jules was about 9, he came home from school one day with a sign on his back saying, "Kick me, I'm a retard." And saying,
"Oh my gosh,
Mum, the kids are calling me a retard. Am I a retard? What is a retard?" And even to use that word. Now, as a mother, you might as well have ripped my heart out of my chest, thrown it on the ground and stomped on it. And of course, it makes you incredibly overprotective. And I've always been overprotective, And when he was a teenager, I'd never let him out the door without a list of instructions longer than War and Peace and enough. And he had to set up a comfortable wilderness homestead, But the quandary is, how will you know if they can ever cope in the outside world if you never let them out into it? So you have to let them out into it, but just try and equip them in the best way you can.
I just follow mine on their iCloud.
Oh, do you?
I know where they are at all times. Yeah,
I used to follow
I'm like a spy,
like a commando. I'd say, yes, of course you can go out by yourself. And I'd be in camouflage fatigues, scurrying along behind the cars, crawling on my elbows up the street to just make sure he was safe and okay. So, yeah, there's the
Yeah.
parents. I mean, I just think all parents of autistic kids should just get parenting medals because it is so much fun.
Agreed.
And you sort of, no one ever pats you on the back. I mean, we should have a podium once a year where we step up and they go, here is your parenting medal because you're a medal.
Yeah, gold every year.
Oh.
So tell me something, were you raising your children with a partner at this point?
Yes.
So what was that like? Because sometimes I know with David, my husband, and I, it's taken us, we shift at different stages. We take different speeds. So I grabbed stuff very quickly. I was like, right, that's it. We need to completely flatline what we've been doing. Let's learn a whole new way of parenting for these children. And David was like, no, we're going to stick to the old way. They need boundaries. They need, and that for us, for about a year, we were on totally different pages. It was really difficult.
Well, sadly, the instances of depression and divorce and unemployment in families where there's autism, it's really, really high because of the added stresses and strains. And that was the one thing I didn't like about The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which I loved, the book and everything, but the mother left. Like, mothers never leave. Fathers leave often, I hate to say, but mothers don't leave. So I could never really warm to the project because of that reason. I thought it was a betrayal of all the mothers I know who soldiered on their own. Of course, there are some great dads, but many dads do leave. It's too hard. And I think
we find in our group sometimes what happens is the mum leaves their job.
Yeah. Well,
and so they then become full-time carer.
Sure.
And then dad has got to work doubly hard, so feels much more disconnected from the home, comes home and obviously his partner is going, come and help me. I've had 12 hours of this all day. Please help me. And of course, their relationship then becomes very strained.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, and I had to pull back on my career big time with Jules because so luckily I write so I could work at home and I could make my own hours. I was my own boss, but I gave up TV presenting. I had a good career on television, but I couldn't travel. I had to give up travel writing. I had to give up all sorts of broadcasting things I was doing and also book tours around the world because I couldn't be away. So my career had to shrink and I just concentrated on the writing because it was portable. Many novels I wrote in the waiting room of the Tavistock while Jules was doing
which is what I'm doing exactly that right now.
Right.
In the same place.
Exactly. So you just have to adapt and do the best that you can. But it is really hard. It is, there's no doubt about it.
And then thinking about parenting an adult, because your parenting never stops, does it, for any parent? But, for us, perhaps it's slightly more intense. So now that Jules is a big grown-up man, what's your parenting like now?
Well, of course, I'm post-menopause. And what happens post-menopause is that your estrogen drops, which is your caring, sharing hormone, and your testosterone comes up a bit. So you get a little bit more selfish, a little bit more bolshy, a little bit more like a bloke, actually. And all my women friends my age are now, they've cut the psychological umbilical cord with their kids. They're traveling. They're, swinging off a chandelier with a toy boy between their teeth. And they're kind of liberated. But, of course, I will never be completely liberated because I'm still Jules' main carer and his confidant and all of that. So I can leave him for much longer periods now because he's a 31-year-old man and he's got support. He's got a wonderful carer he has for 15 hours a week. And she can go on set with him when he's filming and all those kinds of things, which takes a lot of the burden from me. And I'm trying to take his trainer wheels off. I've got him a little flat now and he's going to try living there and learning to do his own cooking and all those good things. But it's really slow process because he's dyspraxic as well, which means sequencing is very hard. So teaching him, even just doing basic domestic chores, if you tell him 3 things to do in a row, he can forget what the middle one was or the first one. Like, it's very, very slow parenting, slow teaching, even though he's so quick and so bright. The dyspraxia holds him back in that way. So it's just repetition is the art of teaching. Because, of course, I worry endlessly about what will happen to him when I'm dead. And this is what the parents of autistic kids, it keeps you awake at night. Will he have enough survival skills? And you don't want to leave, I don't want his sister to be burdened with his care. So he has to learn to be independent. And the other thing parents fall into the trap when you have autistic kids of doing too much for them because it's faster, especially if they're dyspraxic and you have to explain everything slowly. So you do everything for them, but then long-term that's a disaster because, they're still on their domestic, L plates.
It's like a gradual walking away, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, you're not walking away, but just I think sometimes there are things that my children can't actually do, so I have to do those things.
Yeah.
But it's recognizing the point and looking out for the point at which actually we're 2 years down the line now, so perhaps you could start booking your own train rather than me booking your trains.
Yeah.
But when you've always done it for them, I think it's hard for parents to just go, oh, does my job have to shift? And actually, if we've given up a lot of life in order to care for our child, I think it can be a moment of having a bit of an identity crisis for some parents. I mean, maybe different for you and I because we both work, but for parents that have actually don't work at all, I think that can be really hard.
Well, I know you want to talk about the books later, but in The Boy Who Fell to Earth, I wrote a mother. It's about a single mother raising a child on the autistic spectrum. And I wrote that for other parents just to let them know they're not alone. It's like a manual saying this is what to expect, but it's funny. I made it as funny as I could too because, dear God, we need a laugh. And also a lot of raising autistic kids can be funny because you never know what they're going to say, Socially,
Brilliant.
I sweat more than Donald Trump doing a Sudoku because I never know what will come out of Jules. He'd be the world's best talk show host because he asks these kind of really intimate questions. And because of his condition, because he's autistic, no one could be rude to him. They'd have to answer. But getting back to what we were saying, why I raised that was to say the mother I wrote in that book is a single mother raising a child on the spectrum. But she's using his autism as so she doesn't have to engage with the world. She's almost in mummy martyr mode, and there's a love interest in the story who says to her that she's the one who's actually got special needs, and in a way because she's got to let him go. She's just got to find his own feet, but she doesn't have an identity without that. That he's her excuse. So I think that there is a bit of that does happen.
And that leads rather nicely into your latest book, Till Death or to Maim, isn't it? Or a little like maiming, do us part.
Yes, because there's an autistic.
Because you are the other side. Yeah, tell us about that.
Oh well, this is a funny. It's a funny book I wrote just because I thought, have we ever needed a laugh more? For God's sake, 2 years of pandemic. So just quickly, it begins with a mother. She's a 60-year-old mum and she's a teacher and she's driving to school and she hears on the radio that a man's been taken by a great white shark. And it's where her husband swims. So she tears down to the beach and she gets out and she's just realising it is her husband who's missing and she's just starting her grieving process when another woman turns up, 50-year-old Jazz on a 50-year-old Tish, on a motorbike. She's a jazz singer, and she thinks it's her husband. And they quickly realise they're married to a bigamist, and he's disappeared with all their money. So it's an odd couple comedy where they buddy up to chase their money around the world. But there's an autistic. Gwen, the teacher, has an autistic son who's in his late 20s, and they've never really found their connection. But he comes into his own now because he's very good at cyber sleuthing. So they have to track their money down, and he's one step ahead of them all the time, helping them. So, and it was a joy to write this character because I love to show autistic people, coping brilliantly in the world and actually having their superpowers on that they can do because of this incredible, quirky and high IQ so many of them have. This can be an incredible asset. So it was really fun to write an autistic male character who was so clever and so and was helping his mother so much. and putting autism into such a great light, and how they found their deep love for each other through helping each other. So that was really fun to write. Yeah.
So when you're writing, are you thinking this would make a great TV film or film, and we could cast Jules in that role?
Oh, all the time. I wrote this
Me
role.
too.
Yeah, I wrote this role for him.
Just creating jobs for my children, yeah.
Keeping it in the family, Absolutely. But I would say to anyone who's raising a child on the spectrum, I think the two only bits of advice I would give, one is to build up their self-esteem, because all day they're told they're wrong, they're stupid, they're out of sync. So their self-esteem sinks down kind of lower than Kim Kardashian's bikini line, which is, quite low. And the other thing I would say is feed their obsessions, because many autistic people are very obsessive. They've got OCD a lot of the time as well. But it doesn't matter what it is, if it's igneous rock formations or, I don't know, Tibetan nose fluting or Amazonian, moth wing fluctuations, whatever. Because you never know where it will take them. And I'd love to know how your kids got into acting, but my son wanted to do acting classes, and I was like, how do you put the artistic into autistic? I couldn't quite see it. But then he said to me, but Mum, I'm acting every day. I'm acting trying to be normal. I thought, what a great line. And I went to watch him in his acting. I enrolled him in an acting school at Regent's College in Regent's Park, and they took autistic people, which was really helpful and very, broad-minded and open of them at the time. And I used to go and watch him, and I think, you're really good. And then I thought, oh, no, it's the mum goggles. You know how you see everything through the love filter?
Oh, yeah.
But then
they're about to win Oscars all the time.
But then he won a few little prizes, and then he got cast in a couple of little films, and then he got a big part in Holby City, playing an autistic character. And this, I think, as far as I know, it was the first time that an autistic actor had been cast to play an autistic character.
Yeah, he's the first.
And it really to help take the stigma out of autism, because it's more useful than a million dry documentaries on autism, because of course the audience are emoting with him and relating with him. And Holby City was such a great, happy family on set. And he had the brilliant Catherine Russell playing Dr. Serena, was it Serena? Serena Campbell. And then he had Gemma Redgrave as her lesbian love interest. And he couldn't have been in safer thespian hands than having these two wonderful actresses, but also human beings to sort of keep him, to make him look good. And we're all really good friends now. Adore them both. So it was a very, very happy experience. But sadly, Holby's come to an end. But he's just been cast in Midsummer Murders, which is exciting, playing a murder suspect. So, but like you, I want to start writing vehicles for them, because producers just don't think outside the neurotypical box often enough. So,
I think also, I know that my children talk about the lack of representation, not ever seeing themselves in a book or on screen. My children are also mixed race. So actually, when you've got different intersections as well going on, to never see yourself represented, it's very hard then to imagine what you would be when you go out into the world if you've never seen yourself represented anywhere out there.
That's right. Well,
which is why our children are breaking ground in that way.
Yeah. Absolutely. Sure. Yeah. Talking about, being part of diversity, I think also women over 60 can be put in that category, because 85% of people on television over 50 in Britain are men. So women also get put out to pasture. So, I can commiserate with autistic.
We disappear, don't we?
Give them the cloak of invisibility. But the thing is, will we use that cloak for good or for evil? I haven't decided yet.
I love it. So just tell me something then. So when Jules was in school, I'm thinking about what it's like for my children. I had, at the age of when they were when Tyler was 16, got the job on Hollyoaks. But just before that, I was thinking, what will my child do in the outside world? Like, how does it work? And I've got the same thing now with the next one, who's now 16. I'm thinking, What happens when they leave school? Did you have that
Oh,
anxiety?
gosh. Yeah. I mean, less than 15% of people with autism are in the workforce, which is a much lower inclusion rate than other
Yeah,
different
our
labels.
study said 20, but yeah, it's really low.
It's really
So,
low.
you know,
Yeah. And yet, we know that with their particular idiosyncrasies and their obsessions, they, in very many professions, they would be such an asset with their attention
yeah.
to detail and their obsessional memory. Jules is obsessed with acting. He knows when he meets actors, like he met Kenneth Branagh with me one night. He told Kenneth Branagh every single film he'd been in, every ad he'd been, every voiceover he'd ever done. He knew more about Kenneth Branagh than his own mother. And Kenneth Branagh's not even one of his top favourite actors. When he meets
Yeah.
tennis players, he tells them every match point of every game they've ever played. So if there weren't computers, Jules would be in such huge demand because of this phenomenal memory he has for things he's interested
Yeah.
in. At the same time, if he goes to the corner shop, he won't remember what I asked him to get. But if it's something he's interested in, it's extraordinary, this memory bank. Like, I didn't even have a diary. I said, Jules, where was I on the 3rd of June, 2002?
Yeah.
He will know where I was, what we were doing, and what I was wearing. Like, it's incredible.
Wowza.
Wow.
That's incredible. But of course, not autistic people have those skills, but it would still be good to see. One of the things we're doing here, this podcast is being made by Auticon, and their work is about placing
Right.
autistic people in with jobs. So in one way, they have a coach that helps the autistic person, but at the same time, the people go to the client, the person who's employing the autistic person, and then help to prepare them for this is what it's going to be like when your autistic person comes in to work. And I think we need more of that, don't we? We need that kind of working both ways. So it prepares the autistic person, but also prepares the company, because I don't know what it was like at Holby, but with Hollyoaks, they were brilliant. They sent everybody on autism training.
Wow.
They put all these different measures and adjustments in that then made it so much easier for Thailand to go to work. Not only did it make it easier for Thailand to go to work, Thailand began to change. So then Thailand could take more on, could take more demands, because Thailand knew that their needs were getting met. And I think too often what happens is, if our needs aren't met for anybody, but particularly autistic cohort, if your needs aren't being met, your anxiety is raised, and then your toleration levels go down. So you can do even less.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, that Hollyoaks sounds absolutely brilliant. Holby didn't do any training, as far as I know, but they were just such a lovely operation that everybody was so accommodating. And they loved having Jules on set because he's so funny. And because he breaks down boundaries, and he made them feel really good. So, it was really exciting. But what he wants to do next, I mean, I'm happy to say, like, they would never make Rain Man now, starring Dustin.
No, thank goodness. Yeah.
Thank goodness. But Jules he said to me the other day that he thinks that Hamlet was autistic. And I said, why? And he said, well, obsessional behaviour, not very empathetic, didn't notice that Ophelia was about to kill herself. Anxiety, so anxious about everything all the time. He said he wants to play the first autistic Hamlet. And I was like, well, that would be amazing. But could you actually take on that huge role? And of course, his memory's so phenomenal. He can learn the dialogue, but also because it's doing the same thing every night. Where some people find that really, really boring. He would find that really, really reassuring. So I'm hoping that maybe that can be a project he could get his teeth into next.
What was it like for him getting an agent?
Well, he used to be with Access All Areas, who are a terrific agency, and they, they help lots of neurodiverse actors into parts, and I love them. But then he got sort of poached by Luke Chowdhury, who's really great and loves Jules and finds Jules really funny, and is really pushing to get him to meet directors and producers, and he's totally on side. So we've got high hopes for him. If we're putting our kids into the workforce, one of the things we have to explain to their employers is that they do have this candor. Because I could imagine a job interview with Jules where the employer says, so what do you think your worst qualities are? What do we have to worry about? And he could say, well, the fact that I tell the truth, that I'm very candid. And I can imagine the employer saying, but I don't think that's a weakness, that's a good thing. And Jules saying, well, I don't give a stuff what you think. He could say that, So they have to, people who employ autistic people have to understand that they can sometimes seem a bit taciturn and a bit caustic, but there's just that they're really, really honest and they've got so much candor. And I really value that. I love that. And Jules,
I love that.
Very charming too. I mean, I'm lucky that he's very charming and funny. So even when he's being honest, he does it in such a disarming way that it just makes people laugh. So I'm lucky in that respect. Yeah.
Just to finish off then, Kathy, because I feel like you are the sort of the auntie of the autistic parent world, because you've got your 31-year-old child. A lot of us are bringing up children that are a little bit just behind that, and I really appreciate your honesty in regard to how hard it was 31 years ago, because, we think it's really, really hard now. Oh. We do. We still are on our knees trying to access help. But hearing your story, it makes me appreciate, things have moved on.
Yeah.
Girls are now getting diagnosis. Like there's all sorts of stuff that wasn't even happening 30 years ago, really, or rarely happening.
Before you asked me the question, I just remembered something on that note, because when Jules got expelled from preschool because he put the teacher's shoes in the bin or something, and, he got expelled, and I knew he had the diagnosis at 3. He was probably about 4 then. So I was when he got expelled, I was so upset, and I came out of the schoolroom and I was, just thinking, what am I going to do? Where do I go now? Where can I get him educated? Why can't someone help me? I saw another mother having a little quiet cry under a tree, and I thought, she's also had a diagnosis of autism or something, and I'm going to go over and reach out to her, mother to mother. And I went over and said, are you okay? What's wrong? And she's sobbing her head off, and she said, it's Tarquin. He's 4, by the way. He's not taking to his French. And I was like,
oh my gosh.
And I thought, I wanted to get in my car and run her over repeatedly until death. And I thought a jury of mothers of special needs kids would acquit me.
Yeah.
Because I thought,
literally, Kathy, I have been in exactly that situation when I had a child on suicide watch and had to stand at the school gate with the other mums. And I love those other mums, but honestly, they were like, I'm so worried because I'm going to have to get a private tutor in order to get them through this SATs exam. And you're like, everyone's thinking about SATs exams, and I just want my child to live.
I know. I hear you. I absolutely hear you.
Just like, please, honestly, if they don't get spellings right at the age of 5, really just please sweat the small stuff.
Right.
Really?
I'm with you.
Honestly.
I'm totally with you. You and I don't have to buddy up and write something together.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So tell me something. So I want to know, thinking for our listeners, we've got lots of people with every different role around autism. So we've got employers of autistic people, we've got parents, we've got lots of autistic people themselves listen to this podcast. What would you like to see happen? Let's fast forward 10 years. What would the world look like for our kids if they were growing up in 10 years' time? What would you want to see, particularly in regard to getting jobs and stuff?
Yeah, I just want employers to, as I said, think outside the neurotypical box, and just give our kids a chance to shine, because they will shine. They're just given a chance, the opportunity, and a little bit of tolerance and understanding. They can give back to society in the most wonderful way. But unfortunately, I don't like to call it a disability, but their difference is invisible. Like, they don't have a white stick or a wheelchair or whatever. So people often expect too much from them too quickly. But too often they end up living on a bedsit and benefits, but living in a bedsit on benefits. But they could, as I said, give back to society in the most interesting and innovative and extraordinary ways if we should just give them a chance to shine.
Kathy Lette, thank you so much for today.
Thank you so much for listening. We really hope you enjoyed this episode of Autism in Conversation with Auticon. This episode was recorded in April 2022 and contributors are using community preference language at this time. Recording and production was at Strathmore Studios in Clerkenwell, London, and it was engineered and edited by Billy Godfrey, and music was by The Lethargies. If you'd like to know more about the podcast, would be interested in applying for a job as an Auticon consultant, or would like further information about how Auticon can help support your business, please visit auticon.co.uk. That's all from us this time. Bye for now.